Hi, first graders. If you remember, yesterday we talked about a man called Aesop. He was the man who was responsible for writing over 600 fables. Do you remember what a fable is? A fable is a short story that tells a lesson or a moral. It almost always involves an animal. It usually takes place outside, and it can often relate to our own life. So, as we read these fables today, I want you to think about who are the characters, what is the lesson the fable is trying to tell me, or what is the moral of this story, and how can I relate this moral to my own life? So, we're going to start with a great one that I think you guys will all be able to relate to. This is called The Hippopotamus at Dinner. The hippopotamus went into a restaurant. He sat at his favorite table. "Waiter," called the hippopotamus, "I will have the bean soup, the Brussels sprouts, and the mashed potatoes. Please hurry, I am enormously hungry tonight." In a short while, the waiter returned with the order. The hippopotamus glared down at his plate. "Waiter," he said, "do you call this a meal? These portions are much too small. They would not satisfy a bird. I want a bathtub of bean soup, a bucket of Brussels sprouts, and a mountain of mashed potatoes. I tell you, I have an appetite." Uh-oh, what do you think might happen? Let's keep reading and find out. The waiter went back into the kitchen. He returned carrying enough bean soup to fill a bathtub, enough Brussels sprouts to fill a bucket, and a mountain of mashed potatoes. In no time, the hippopotamus had eaten every last morsel. "Delicious," said the hippopotamus as he dabbed his mouth with a napkin and prepared to leave. To his surprise, he could not move. His stomach, which had grown considerably larger, was caught between the table and the chair. He pulled and tugged, but it was no use. He could not budge. The hour grew late. The other customers in the restaurant finished their dinners and left. The cooks took off their aprons and put away their pots. The waiters cleared the dishes and turned out the lights. They all went home. The hippopotamus remained there, sitting forlornly at the table. "Perhaps I should not have eaten quite so many Brussels sprouts," he said as he gazed into the gloom of the darkened restaurant. Occasionally, he burped. How do you think the hippopotamus is feeling now? Do you think he regrets making the choices he made? All right, thinking about what happened in the story and how the hippopotamus is feeling now, what do you think the lesson of the story might be? I want you to pause the video and turn and talk to a neighbor. What do you think the lesson or the moral of this story could be? I think the moral is that too much of anything isn't good. Too much of anything often leaves someone with a feeling of regret. Have you ever gone to Cece's buffet and eaten so much pizza because it's so delicious, and then after you have a pretty bad stomachache and you kind of wish you hadn't eaten all that? That's happened to me when I was your age, and that's how I relate to this story. But now, one way I can relate to this story to my life now is sometimes I like to stay up really late and watch TV. But in the morning, do you think I regret that decision? Absolutely. Even though I love watching TV and I love staying up late, too much of doing what I love can lead me to regret my decisions. Can you think of another way besides eating too much that you think that too much of a good thing often makes you regret your choices? Discuss with a friend. I want to read you another fable. Do you remember how we talked about how Aesop's fables got passed down and they spread across different cultures? And each time they got a little bit different, but a lot of times they still held the same meaning. Well, this one, The Fox and the Crane, that I'm about to read, is from Eric Carle. Many of you have probably read several of his books. And so it's a little different. It's a little more modern than some of Aesop's fables. But just like Aesop, he made his collection of fables and just made it a little more the way we talk today and a little more specific to our culture. So I'm going to get started reading The Fox and the Crane. A stingy fox once invited a crane to his house for dinner. Do you know what stingy means? Stingy means someone who's not very generous. They don't like to spend any money. He served a delicious meal, but he put it on very flat plates. The poor crane, with her long beak, could not get at the food at all. She turned her neck this way and that, but it didn't help. The food always slipped away from her beak. The fox, pretending not to notice the crane's trouble, gobbled up the food in no time. Of course, the crane was still hungry after the table had been cleared. How do you think the crane's feeling? Maybe disappointed or frustrated? "Dear Miss Crane," said the fox as the crane was leaving, "I hope you've enjoyed your meal. Let's get together soon again." Do you think the fox should have noticed that the crane was having trouble? Do you think the fox was being a very good host? I don't think so. The crane nodded her head politely, but she did not reply. However, soon afterward, the crane invited the fox to her house for dinner. She, too, served a delicious meal, but in very tall, thin goblets. Uh-oh, what do you think will happen to the fox? Of course the fox couldn't get at the food. He tried this way and he tried that way, but it didn't help. His food was down at the bottom of the goblet, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't reach it. In the meantime, the crane put her long beak down into her tall, thin goblet and easily ate it up. This time, it was the fox who was still hungry after the table had been cleared. "Dear Mr. Fox," said the crane as the fox was leaving, "I hope you've enjoyed your meal. Let's get together again soon." But the embarrassed fox never called on the crane again. So the crane kind of got him back, huh? All right, again, I want you to pause the video and turn and talk to a friend about what you think the message of this story could be. The moral of this story is treat others as you want to be treated. Was it very kind of the fox to make a meal that he knew the crane wouldn't be able to eat? Was that very considerate? No. And the crane did the same thing. He treated the fox as the fox treated the crane. And how do you think that made the fox feel? Do you think he might regret treating the crane the way he did? So I want you to think about how this might relate to your own life. Maybe when you're at recess and you always want to play a certain game, but you know your friend really doesn't like that game. And then whenever it's your friend's turn to pick the game and they pick a game that they know you don't like, that would kind of be an example. I know that happens sometimes at recess. So maybe next time you're at recess, you think of a game that you guys all like to play. You treat others the way you want to be treated.